Hello, my friend. Before we begin this story, I want you to imagine something. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a dark ocean. A vast ocean. Silent. Endless. Mysterious. The wind is cold. The waves move slowly, like giant shadows breathing in the night. Somewhere, far away from land, steel ships cut through the water. These ships are not ordinary ships. They belong to men who have chosen a different life. A harder life. A life of courage. A life of sacrifice. They are sailors. They are warriors. They are the men of the United States Navy. And my friend, there is something special about people who wear a uniform. Because when a nation sleeps peacefully, someone in uniform stays awake. When families sit together at dinner, someone in uniform stands guard in the dark. When children laugh and play, someone in uniform protects their future. That is the quiet promise of every soldier. And tonight, our story begins with that promise. But this story is not just about ships. It is not just about war. It is about courage. It is about loyalty. And it is about a moment in history, when ordinary men stood between chaos and peace. The year is 1988. The place, the Persian Gulf. At that time, the Gulf was one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Oil tankers were being attacked. Sea mines floated silently under the waves. Every ship entering the region knew one thing. Death could be waiting just beneath the water. But the United States had made a decision. America would protect international shipping. America would protect freedom of navigation. And that is why American warships sailed into danger. Not because war is beautiful, but because sometimes, courage demands it. One of those ships moved slowly through the dark waters that night. On the deck, young sailors stood watch. Some were only 20 years old. Some were far from home for the first time. But every one of them carried the same responsibility. To protect. To defend. To stand strong. Inside the command room, radars glowed softly. Screens flickered. Officers watched every signal carefully. Because in that region, one small mistake could mean disaster. But something unusual was happening. Reports were coming in. Ships damaged. Mines discovered. Tension rising. And then, a message arrived that would change everything. A U.S. Navy ship had struck a mine. The explosion tore through the water like thunder. Metal screamed. The ocean exploded into foam and fire. For a moment, it looked like the ship might sink. But something incredible happened. The crew did not panic. They did not run. They did what sailors are trained to do. They fought. They fought the fire. They fought the flooding. They fought the fear. Because that is what soldiers do. They fight, even when hope feels distant. My friend, right now, as you are listening to this story, think about those men. Imagine standing on that damaged ship. Smoke everywhere. Alarms screaming. Water rushing inside. And yet, not one sailor abandoned his duty. Not one man ran away. That is the spirit of the military. That is the spirit that protects nations. Now here is something important. If stories like this move you, if the courage of these sailors means something to you, take 1 second right now. Like this video. And subscribe to the channel. Because every story we share here honors real bravery and real history. And trust me, what you are about to hear next will only get more intense. Because that damaged ship was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, the United States was preparing a response. A powerful response. A response that would soon become the largest naval battle since World War II for the United States Navy. But before that battle began, there was silence. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. In the early morning hours, American warships moved into position. Destroyers, frigates, support ships, helicopters waited on flight decks. Pilots sat inside their cockpits. Engines ready. Missiles armed. And somewhere inside those ships, young sailors wrote letters home. Letters to mothers. Letters to wives. Letters to children. Some letters said, "Don't worry about me." Some said, "I'll be home soon." And some said nothing about fear. Because soldiers rarely speak about fear. They carry it quietly. Inside their hearts. Then the order finally came. A clear command. Short. Direct. Unmistakable. The United States Navy would launch Operation Praying Mantis. A mission designed to respond to attacks on American forces and shipping. But my friend, no one yet knew how intense this operation would become. No one knew that in just a few hours, missiles would fly. Ships would burn. Helicopters would roar over the sea. And history would be written in fire and steel. But before that moment arrived, before the first shot was fired, something powerful happened on those ships. The sailors gathered. Some prayed quietly. Some looked out at the ocean. Some simply breathed deeply. Because they all understood something important. War is not about hatred. For soldiers, war is about duty. Duty to protect. Duty to serve. Duty to stand when others cannot. And in that moment, every man on those ships understood the same truth. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The ocean wind grew stronger. The sky slowly turned gray with the coming sunrise. Helicopters lifted from the decks. Rotors slicing through the air. Warships changed course. Radar screens lit up with new signals. The operation had begun. And somewhere in the distance, Iranian military positions waited. Neither side knew exactly what the next hours would bring. But one thing was certain. History was about to witness something extraordinary. My friend, if you think this story is intense now, you have not heard anything yet. Because in the next chapter, American helicopters will approach enemy platforms. Missiles will launch across the sea. And one brave pilot will face a moment that will test the limits of courage. And when that moment comes, you will understand something important. Why men and women in uniform are respected across the world. Why nations honor their soldiers. And why stories like this must never be forgotten. So stay with me. Because the ocean is about to erupt. And the true story of Operation Praying Mantis is only just beginning. My friend, the sun had not fully risen yet. The sky above the Persian Gulf was still painted in soft shades of gray and orange. The ocean looked calm. Almost peaceful. But beneath that calm surface, history was about to explode. American ships moved silently across the water. Steel giants cutting through the waves. Their radar systems scanning the horizon. Their crews alert. Focused. Ready. Because now, the operation had begun. The mission was clear. Neutralize hostile military positions. Protect international shipping. And send a message that attacks on American forces would not go unanswered. One of the first targets stood in the middle of the sea. An offshore oil platform. But this was no ordinary platform. It had been turned into a military observation post. From there, enemy forces could watch shipping traffic. They could guide attacks. They could threaten every ship crossing the Gulf. So the United States Navy made a decision. That platform had to be stopped. Slowly, 2 American warships approached the structure. Among them was the powerful destroyer USS Merrill, DD-976. On its deck, sailors prepared their weapons. Guns aimed at the distant platform. Inside the ship, the command center was completely silent. Every officer watched the radar screens. Every second felt heavy. Because once the first shot was fired, there would be no turning back. Then, the American commander sent a message to the platform. A warning. Clear and direct. Evacuate immediately. Leave the structure. Because an attack was coming. For a few moments, nothing happened. The ocean remained quiet. The platform stood still in the distance. Then suddenly, small boats began leaving the structure. Figures could be seen moving quickly. The warning had been heard. The countdown had begun. Minutes later, the order finally came. Fire. A deep thunder shook the air. American naval guns roared to life. Shells streaked across the sky. Within seconds, the platform was engulfed in explosions. Flames burst into the air. Metal structures shattered. Smoke rose high above the sea. From miles away, other ships could see the fire burning. But this was only the beginning. Because the battle was spreading. Above the ocean, American helicopters lifted from the decks of warships. Their rotors sliced through the wind. These helicopters belonged to the legendary United States Navy. Inside them, pilots and crew members prepared for combat. Their mission was dangerous. Extremely dangerous. They had to search for enemy boats. Armed speedboats that could attack tankers and ships. The helicopters flew low over the water. Scanning. Watching. Searching. The ocean below looked endless. But suddenly, one of the pilots saw something. Fast-moving boats. Cutting through the waves. Armed. Aggressive. These boats had already attacked commercial ships earlier that day. Now they were heading toward another target. But they did not know something important. They were being watched. The American helicopter moved closer. The pilot spoke calmly into the radio. Target acquired. Within seconds, the helicopter fired warning shots. Bright flashes lit the sky. The speedboats scattered. Some turned. Some accelerated. But the helicopter remained above them like a shadow. Missiles were ready. Guns were ready. And within moments, the sea erupted again. Explosions tore through the water. One of the boats burst into flames. Another slowed down, heavily damaged. Smoke drifted across the waves. The attack had been stopped. But the pilots knew something. This battle was growing larger. Much larger. Back on the American ships, more reports began arriving. Radar signals. Enemy movements. Tension rising. Somewhere out there in the vast ocean, enemy warships were moving. Real warships. Armed with missiles. And powerful enough to challenge American forces. The officers on the American ships understood what this meant. The situation could escalate very quickly. Because if those ships entered the fight, the Gulf would turn into a full naval battlefield. My friend, imagine being one of those sailors right now. Standing on the deck. Watching smoke rise in the distance. Knowing enemy warships might appear at any moment. Your heart beating faster. But your training keeping you calm. This is the life of a soldier. Courage, mixed with uncertainty. Duty, stronger than fear. And in that moment, every American sailor understood something important. They were part of something bigger than themselves. They were defending a principle. Freedom of the seas. The right for ships to travel safely across international waters. And that is why they stayed focused. Because the world was watching. And history was still unfolding. My friend, before we continue the story, I want to tell you something important. Remember the young pilot flying above the ocean, searching for enemy boats. Imagine the pressure he felt in that moment. Imagine the responsibility he carried. If stories like his courage inspire you, take a second right now. Like this video. And subscribe to the channel. Because every story here honors real bravery and real sacrifice. And trust me, the most intense part of this story is still ahead. Because while helicopters were chasing speedboats, something much bigger was approaching. An Iranian warship. Fast. Heavily armed. Moving toward American forces. And when that ship entered the battlefield, one of the most dramatic naval confrontations of the late 20th century would begin. Missiles would fly across the ocean. Warships would maneuver at high speed. And the world would witness a moment that proved something powerful. That the courage of sailors and the strength of the United States Navy could change the course of a battle in minutes. The ocean wind grew stronger. The waves hit the hulls of the American ships. Radar operators leaned closer to their screens. And then, a new signal appeared. Large. Moving quickly. Getting closer. The enemy warship had arrived. And my friend, what happened next would become one of the most dramatic moments in modern naval history. Fire on the horizon. My friend, the ocean was no longer calm. The quiet morning in the Persian Gulf had turned into something else. Something heavier. Something dangerous. Smoke still drifted across the water from the earlier strikes. Pieces of metal floated between the waves. Helicopters circled high above the sea. And on the radar screens of American warships, a new signal had appeared. A large signal. Moving fast. Inside the command room of the American destroyer USS Merrill, DD 976, officers leaned closer to their screens. The radar operator spoke quietly. Contact detected, large vessel, moving toward our position. The room became silent. Because everyone knew what that meant. This was not a small boat. This was not a patrol craft. This was a warship. And it belonged to Iran. The name of that ship would soon become famous in naval history. The Iranian frigate IRIS Sahand. A powerful warship. Armed with missiles. Armed with guns. And ready to fight. Out on the open water. The Sahand moved quickly through the waves. Its crew was also watching the horizon. They had seen the smoke from the destroyed platforms. They had heard the reports of American helicopters attacking speedboats. And now, they were moving to respond. Two forces were now heading toward each other. Two navies. Two groups of sailors. Each doing what they believed was their duty. My friend, this is the moment in every battle when tension becomes real. When radar signals turn into actual ships. When decisions must be made quickly. And when courage matters more than anything else. Back on the American ships, commanders spoke calmly into radios. Orders were given. Positions were adjusted. Helicopters were moved into better attack angles. Missile systems were activated. The ocean wind carried the smell of fuel and smoke. Then suddenly, something happened. The Sahand launched a missile. A bright flash appeared from the Iranian ship. A missile streaked across the sky. Fast. Deadly. Heading toward the American helicopters. Inside the helicopter cockpit, the pilot saw the launch. His heart jumped. But his voice remained calm. Missile launch detected. Within seconds, the helicopter changed direction. Flares dropped into the air. Bright flashes of light designed to confuse the incoming missile. The missile roared past, missing its target. The pilot took a deep breath. He was alive. But now the battle had truly begun. Back on the American ships, the commanders saw the missile launch on radar. That attack changed everything. Because now, the rules of engagement were clear. The American forces could respond with full power. And that response came quickly. Very quickly. The American ships launched their own missiles. High-speed anti-ship missiles streaked across the sky. At the same time, attack aircraft from the powerful aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, CVN-65, were already in the air. These aircraft belonged to the legendary Strike Fighter Squadron. Pilots who had trained for moments exactly like this. Flying toward danger. Flying toward combat. Within minutes, the Iranian frigate Sahand found itself under attack from multiple directions. Missiles approached at incredible speed. The first missile struck the ship with a violent explosion. Fire erupted across the deck. Smoke poured into the sky. But the attack was not over. Another missile followed. Then another. Explosions ripped through the warship. The sea around it turned black with smoke. Flames climbed higher and higher. My friend, imagine being one of the sailors watching this from miles away. Standing on the deck of an American warship. Seeing explosions on the horizon. Feeling the power of modern naval warfare. It was a moment filled with intensity. A moment filled with history. Because the battle happening in front of them would soon be recorded as the largest U.S. naval surface engagement since World War II. Back on the Sahand, the situation was catastrophic. Fire spread across the ship. Weapons systems failed. Smoke filled the air. The once powerful warship now struggled to survive. And slowly, the ship began to lose the fight. Another explosion shook the hull. Flames reached the ammunition storage areas. Moments later, a massive blast erupted. The fireball rose into the sky. And the Sahand began to sink into the waters of the Persian Gulf. The ocean closed over the burning wreck. And with that, one of the most dramatic naval confrontations of the late 20th century had ended. But the battle was not completely finished. Because another Iranian warship had entered the area. The frigate IRIS Sabalan. Unlike the Sahand, this ship would face a different fate. American aircraft approached the vessel. Watching carefully. Waiting. Then suddenly, the Sabalan fired a missile toward the aircraft. Again, the sky flashed with fire. Again, the tension exploded. The American pilot reacted instantly. He released a precision bomb. The bomb dropped through the sky, straight toward the Iranian warship. Seconds later, a powerful explosion hit the Sabalan. The ship was heavily damaged. Its engines stopped. It drifted helplessly in the water. But something interesting happened next. The American forces did not destroy the ship completely. Instead, they stopped their attack. The damaged vessel was left floating. The message had already been sent. Clear. Powerful. Unmistakable. The United States Navy had demonstrated its strength. But it had also shown restraint. And that moment revealed something important about professional militaries. True power is not just about destruction. True power is about control. about discipline, about knowing when to stop. My friend, think about the sailors who lived through those hours. The pilots, the radar operators, the young men standing on the decks of steel ships in the middle of a dangerous sea. None of them knew exactly how the battle would end. But they trusted their training. They trusted each other. And they trusted the mission they had been given. That is the bond that exists in every military unit. A bond stronger than fear. Stronger than uncertainty. Stronger than the chaos of battle. And because of that bond, the operation moved closer to its conclusion. The fires slowly died down. Helicopters returned to their ships. Radar screens became quieter again. The violent storm of battle had passed. But the story of Operation Praying Mantis was not finished yet. Because the final chapter would bring reflection, emotion, and a reminder of why the courage of soldiers matters so much. The silence after the storm. My friend. After the explosions faded. After the smoke slowly disappeared into the sky. The Persian Gulf became quiet again. The same ocean that had been filled with fire only hours earlier now looked calm, peaceful, almost innocent. But the sailors who stood on the decks of American warships knew something important. The ocean had witnessed history that day. Inside the command center of the destroyer USS Naval, DD 976, officers looked again at their radar screens. The signals that once showed enemy ships were gone. The helicopters that had filled the sky with the sound of their rotors were returning to their ships. And slowly, very slowly, the tension began to fade. But something else remained. Pride. Quiet pride. Not loud celebration. Not shouting. Just the silent understanding that they had done their duty. Thousands of miles away from home. Far from their families. These sailors had stood firm when it mattered most. And that is the reality of military life. Moments of danger. Moments of uncertainty. Moments when courage must rise above fear. Because soldiers are not just fighters. They are protectors. Protectors of stability. Protectors of freedom. Protectors of the peaceful life that millions of people enjoy every single day. Later that evening, the sun slowly began to set over the waters of the Persian Gulf. The sky turned deep orange. Long shadows stretched across the decks of the ships. Some sailors leaned quietly against the railings, looking out across the horizon, thinking about everything that had happened. Only hours earlier, missiles had filled the sky. Warships had burned. And the powerful Iranian frigate IRIS Sahand had disappeared beneath the waves. Another ship, the damaged IRIS Sabalan, was drifting in the distance. The battle had been intense. But it had also shown something important to the world. The professionalism of the United States Navy. Because despite the power of their weapons, American forces had shown discipline. They had shown control. And they had shown that strength does not always mean destruction. Sometimes strength means knowing when the mission is complete. Back on the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, CVN 65, pilots stepped down from their aircraft. They removed their helmets. Their faces tired. Their uniforms marked by sweat and long hours. But their eyes showed determination. Because they had just taken part in something historic. Something that would be studied in military academies for decades. And my friend, think about those young men for a moment. Some of them were barely in their 20s. Yet they had flown into combat over an open sea. Facing missiles. Facing uncertainty. Facing the possibility that they might not return home. And still, they flew their missions. They followed their orders. They protected their fellow sailors. That is the spirit that defines every professional military. The spirit of service. The spirit of loyalty. The spirit of courage. Hours later, messages began reaching Washington. Reports from commanders. Damage assessments. Mission summaries. And slowly, the world began to understand what had happened. Operation Praying Mantis had become the largest naval surface engagement for the United States since World War II. But more importantly, it had proven something powerful. That the United States Navy remained one of the most capable naval forces on Earth. A force built not only on technology, but on the character of the men and women who serve within it. My friend, stories like this are not just about war. They are about people. Real people. Real sailors. Real pilots. Real decisions made in moments of extreme pressure. And if stories like this inspire you, if the courage of these sailors moves you, take a moment right now. Like this video. And subscribe to the channel. Because every story we share here keeps these moments of history alive. And it reminds us that bravery should never be forgotten. As night slowly returned to the ocean, the American ships continued their patrols. Engines humming. Radars scanning the horizon. Because the mission of protecting the sea never truly ends. Some sailors went below deck to rest. Others took their positions for the night watch. And somewhere on those ships, a young sailor wrote another letter home. This time the letter was different. Because now he could say something with confidence. We are safe. We did our job. We stood strong. And that simple message carried the truth of the entire operation. Because at the end of the day, military service is not about glory. It is about responsibility. Responsibility to protect something greater than yourself. Responsibility to defend the principles your country believes in. Responsibility to stand in dangerous places so others can live in peace. And that is why stories like Operation Praying Mantis matter. They remind us of the quiet courage that exists far from the spotlight. They remind us of the men and women who sail across dangerous oceans so that trade, travel, and freedom can continue. And they remind us of the deep bond between a nation and the soldiers who protect it. Because in the end, a country is not protected by weapons alone. It is protected by the people who are willing to use those weapons responsibly. People who are willing to sacrifice comfort, safety, and sometimes even their lives. For something bigger. For their country. For their fellow citizens. And my friend, that is why so many people across the world respect the United States military. Because behind every uniform, there is a story of dedication. Behind every ship at sea, there is a crew willing to face danger. And behind every mission like this one, there is a promise. A promise that freedom will be protected. A promise that courage will stand against aggression. And a promise that the men and women of the United States Navy will continue to defend the oceans of the world. So tonight, as you finish listening to this story, remember those sailors standing on the decks of their ships in the middle of the dark ocean. Remember the pilots flying through uncertain skies. Remember the quiet strength that exists inside every soldier who chooses to serve. Because nations remain strong. Not only because of their power, but because of the brave people willing to protect them. And for many Americans, that is why the words United States Navy carry such pride, such respect, and such deep love. Because these sailors do more than sail ships. They protect a nation. They defend freedom. And they remind the world that courage on the open sea can shape the course of history.